Hello everybody, Ben Rogers here, the Raptors Digest, reacting to some Toronto Raptors news, Riker. Obviously, the talk of the season all throughout this past year when we were tanking was, we need a center, right? The question mark was, we played well with the small ball lineup in the playoffs, and we said, hey, maybe we don't really need an actual center. Not to discredit our guy Aaron Baines, throughout the course of the season, but, could we run this year without a true starting center? And unfortunately, the experiment did not work out. I guess it did because we ended up getting a top pick. So it worked out in terms of tanking, in terms of the kazoos, but the Raptors are certainly going to look to fill that hole this offseason. And one name that has come up, Riker, it's been reported the Raptors, along with the Mavericks and the Nets, are interested in signing Nerlens Noel, a New York Knick, to fill in that center spot. What are your initial thoughts on Nerlens Noel potentially coming in and being a center for the Toronto Raptors?
Ben, do we know his contract?
Well, he's a free agent now at this point.
Yeah, I know what he was getting paid last season. I'm gonna search up the Knicks payroll real quick.
Yeah, it was on a lower level.
It would have to be on a lower level, but my fear is that, here it is, $6 million. So you're paying him Aaron Baines money. My fear is that you would be signing this guy to be your starting center. And this guy's never been a starting center in his entire NBA career, except for his first season in Philadelphia, first 2 seasons in Philadelphia. He played about 40 games at the starting position, but obviously for the Knicks, but obviously Mitchell Robinson was out with injury for a lot of the season too. He's putting up 5 points. He's only had 1 season putting up 10 points. You're going to have to pay him money. It's going to have to be that $5-6 million range. Are you comfortable paying $5-6 million to Birch, paying $5-6 million to Nerlens Noel, and saying this is going to be a competitive Eastern Conference playoff team? For me, the answer is no.
Well, Riker, you dove into the stats. I got a little screenshot of his sort of overall career statistics, and as you mentioned, they're not beautiful. They're not something very eye-popping to look at. Throwing them up on the screen. Our heads are just kind of popping over this. Looks like we're looking over a fence, but Nerlens Noel, he's a guy, we'll get there. Flex that height. But got the chairs boosted. But Nerlens Noel, even though his contract's a little bit lower this season, I think he earned himself a lot more money, especially where Mitchell Robinson was injured for the New York Knicks this previous year. He came out this season and showed that he can be an anchor on a top defense in the NBA. Obviously, Tom Thibodeau coached that team and was given a lot of the credit, but I think overlooked was Nerlens Noel just anchoring the backside of that defense. So I think he'll probably make somewhere closer to $10 million perhaps, right? Still not a young guy, but not over the hill by any means. This is his sort of last chance at getting a big contract. And if you recall, he passed up on was it near a max contract with the Dallas Mavericks a few years ago? Obviously, his agent certainly should have been fired for turning that one down. But you look at those stats, and I tend to agree with you, Riker. As a starting center in this league, Nerlens Noel just can't be that guy. He doesn't have the scoring prowess. He can't finish around the rim. Sure, we saw what a lob catcher, a lob finisher can be, right, this season with Khem Birch, but Nerlens Noel, Khem Birch is a solid defender, where Nerlens Noel may be a better shot blocker and rim protector and solid force down in the paint, he's not that level of guy just on the offensive end. And even if you compare him to a Khem Birch, who I also got the stats up there, no big fence for us to look over here, but Khem Birch certainly outplayed him last season in his tenure with the Toronto Raptors. They both were given similar opportunity with Mitchell Robinson injured for the New York Knicks, and obviously the Raptors not having a viable
vacant center position.
So I don't know. You look at the stats: 11 points per game essentially for Khem Birch. Let me look at that. Yeah, 12 points per game, shooting threes by the end of last season. If we're picking between the two, I'm rocking with Khem Birch before I'm rocking with Nerlens Noel, and I was considering Khem Birch a backup center for this team.
That's 2.2 blocks per game. You can't overlook, except if you're on the Defensive Player of the Year candidate selection committee, because they did overlook him. There was a lot of angst there. Draymond Green edged him out. Ben Simmons is always in the conversation. Rudy Gobert, he's part of the Shanghai Sharks meme team, but you can't overlook that he's a good defensive presence, and the Raptors could have used a better interior defender this season, right? You can't overlook that. But if there's issues around not having scoring at times and not being able to use your big man effectively in pick and roll scenarios, then Nerlens Noel is not doing anything to help that issue because he's only taking 3.5, 4.5 shots per game. So it's the same issue as Ben Simmons, really, but not at all. But at the end of the day, if a guy's not shooting, he certainly is not going to be shooting threes for you. And that seems what most of our fan base says. If they can't shoot threes, we basically don't want them. So, that argument alone, I'm in the same boat as you. You're probably playing Kem Birch as your starting center. You sign him. It's not a terrible 1-2 combo to have Nerlens Noel come off the bench if he's going to come in, give you some solid minutes as a backup and get a couple of blocks and maybe get some momentum going on the defensive end. But, certainly if you're paying him to be your starter, this isn't the move.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with you there. And, you and I are both out on Nerlens Noel. We talked about this before. Him as a starter just doesn't really make sense. But in that bench position, right, if he can come off the bench, be an energy guy, spot minutes, if we're obviously, I think we're going to close a lot of games still with that small ball unit because we'll see how the roster shakes out, but that's likely going to be our top 5 guys, being the Siakam at center, OG at center, and, depending on the matchup and such things. But it is essential throughout the course of a regular season to have a true center that can catch you some lobs, can guard in the paint, and obviously we're hoping Kem Birch is that guy, right? But let's say Kem Birch gets paid somewhere else and we need a backup player, or we put our money elsewhere, or we do end up signing Kem Birch as a center, and surely we don't want to rock with Aaron Baines as that guy. Would you be willing to throw that $8 million out there or $10 million to a Nerlens Noel to not necessarily be an insurance guy for this team, right? Because we still have the insurance pylon. But
I don't want to play $25 million for Nerlens Noel and Kem Birch.
Okay.
Nerlens Noel and Kem Birch combination, because if you're paying Nerlens Noel 10 to be your backup, you're paying Kem Birch 15 to be your starter. So I don't feel comfortable.
15. That would be insane.
But you're not paying a guy less than $10 million a year to be your starting center. But this is the argument that I'll also give towards Nerlens Noel. Kem Birch is undersized. He's only 6'9", 6'10" maximum. Nerlens Noel at least is all of 7 foot. So fact check me if you want. He might end up being shorter than what he seems. But no, money wise, this guy, he would have to be at $4 or $5 million a year for me to want him as a backup center.
Interesting.
And that's if you drop the team option of Aaron Baines, you drop the team option of Rodney Hood.
Yeah, well, I think those are just assumptions. There's no way we're picking up those options unless Masai's doing some weird cap stuff to maneuver for trades for getting these types of players, right? Having that defensive presence, I think I'd be willing to overpay a little bit to bring in a Nerlens Noel as a backup if we're really going for it. And, it's tough when you think about it because we do have Freddie Gillespie, who showed some offensive promise, but is more of an undersized center, a gritty guy that doesn't have necessarily the length, but shown that he was willing to get in the way of those shot blockers. Got dunked on a couple times, but had a couple of nice protections underneath the rim. He showed some promise, and obviously Nerlens Noel, he's you're not banking on potential anymore with Nerlens Noel. I think he ended up going 6 in that draft, but he's the projected #1 guy that year and got traded for Drew Holiday. So he, there's a long time people were banking on Nerlens Noel's potential. I don't think that's ever going to get realized. You have Gillespie there, and then you also have a Chris Boucher, Riker, who also factors into the discussion. If, we have a true center, or we have a true starting center, right, that's not Nerlens Noel. Obviously, you and I don't want him to be the starter, right? We have a true center, and then if you have Boucher coming off the bench, could he sort of exist as a backup center for this team? Obviously, you want one true guy that can guard the bigs and this, that, and whatever. Boucher has shown he can play the 5 on occasion, but obviously isn't going to be that guy for you night in, night out. I think there isn't necessarily a massive need for a Nerlens Noel or a secondary guy if we have Chris Boucher off the bench, as well as a Freddie Gillespie, who can be a pure grinder dog if you need him.
I don't agree with you there, because we both had the conversation at the end of last season was you'd really unlock Chris Boucher as a 4. He's not playing out position when he's guarding down the block. He doesn't have the size for that yet. And, he doesn't have to play as much of a two-way game. He can focus on his offense and sort of being that help defender, that secondary help defender that kind of comes from outside mid-range to come in and get a hand, alter shots, right? But not to be the primary guy that's having to wrestle down low to get good paint position or, to hold paint position on the defensive end. So I'd prefer to have a true center come off the bench so that you can play the entire season Chris Boucher as a 4, because he showed us what offensive potential that he had. He had a couple of crazy 20-point games, 25, 30-point games at the end of the season. And we said the 4 spot, that's his spot. That's his niche. So I don't want to see him play as a 5 for an entire season long.
Yeah, no, I tend to agree with you there. That's definitely the route for Chris Boucher, and obviously I've been harping on it consistently. I want Khem Birch as our backup center, and then bring in a guy, Ben Simmons maybe, to start night in, night out at the center position. I know he'd be a small ball guy, but he's underrated tall, or under decisively tall, because he plays the point guard position for the Philadelphia 76ers. But we won't get into the Ben Simmons talk on this one. But if we can get a legitimate starting 5, or a capable starting center, have Kurt Birch as the backup, run Boucher as your power forward, Gillespie, he's insurance in the big man position. That's a really solid front line to pair alongside our obviously all-star and Pascal Siakam. So Nerlens Noel, if we end up losing Birch, he gets overpaid by someone, he'd be a cool guy to bring in as, you're one of your option B, C, D, right, in that territory, especially if you can get him on the cheap. But he's not going to be the savior for the Toronto Raptors, unfortunately.
No. And the one thing we didn't mention, that the Brooklyn Nets are also looking at him, and I'm sure that there's a pull to go towards a team that is much higher in the contending picture, play alongside superstars.
At least right now.
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know if he would get more money. He'd probably get less money that if he got signed by the Brooklyn Nets, but there's always a pull to go to a team that's really at the top of the playoff picture. But I'm hearing too that Kyrie Irving is apparently on the block, so they might be a real mess this offseason. I don't know. I wouldn't hate to see that entire team just implode, but I digress.
Yeah, well, I think if they trade Kyrie for Ben Simmons, that would probably be a move too. I'm high on the Ben Simmons bandwagon. You talked me into it a couple of weeks back. I don't know. Maybe... Exactly. They bring him in defense, but I think Nerlens Noel would also be an interesting fit in Brooklyn just because of his mobility defensive-wise. That's the big question mark with that team. We saw Blake Griffin have a resurgence defensively, and we saw the impact that he had in the playoffs just doing that. He doesn't even have any knees, so if Nerlens Noel can go in there and not have to play any offense at all and just block shots, be a help guy for KD, James Harden, these guys, would be a cool fit. But let us know what you guys think. Do you guys think Nerlens Noel should be coming to the Toronto Raptors? We should be giving him the bag this offseason. Are you in agreement with Ryker and I that maybe pass on Nerlens Noel this go around? You're the best to make this far. Check out the Instagram, the TikTok, all that cool stuff. Little hand motion there. I'm
just passing. I'm passing.
You're passing on him. Ryker, do you have any last words on Nerlens Noel to the Toronto Raptors?
That's it. Nothing else to say, Ben. Cheers.